Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about Super Bowl graphics. There were so many graphics and so much to learn. One of the great ways to learn how to do those graphics is to observe other people's, especially other people's that had almost no limit to their budget to figure it out. So we'll study a little bit about what they're doing and how it might apply to our work. Tomorrow, we have Blair Anderson on, and she is a master metalsmith. She's been doing this for over 35 years. And so she's going to talk about metal smithing and how she adds technology to it as well as just doing it. So she'll be on tomorrow. Friday, of course, we're going to give you an office hours update, talk about where we're at. We're so close, so close to switching over. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like right now. And then Education Saturday. On Saturday, we have, we're not streaming the 8 to 10 window. We talk amongst ourselves there. But at 10 o'clock, we're going to have Laura Thompson on. She's going to talk about accessibility in the classroom, and we will put that on YouTube. And then, of course, Sunday's the more, what are we doing here and why are we doing it? What are the rules of engagement for office hours? So Sunday's a little bit more of the philosophical day. So if you have questions about office hours, that's a good place to do it. All right, let's jump into the questions. And I didn't read the thing, so I don't know who's doing it. Okay,
I think it's
Bill.
me today.
All right, great. Bill,
No
take
problem.
it away.
The first one that popped up for me was Hasmek from Cape Town, South Africa. And he says, updating after-hours host guidelines. Said diplomatically, recording in the main and breakout rooms is not possible. What guidelines currently are there for recording in after-hours?
Any recording of after hours has to be scheduled. So you can't come in and just turn things on. That includes NDI feeds, anything else. You can do it, but you just need to schedule it, and we need to let everybody know, and people need to know what time. There's a lot of people in after hours that are not necessarily public, so it's not appropriate to put anything in there that would turn on if that alert comes up that says we're recording, then you've done something wrong. So that's and pretty much we're going to tighten that up where pretty much you'll get a warning and then you'll get kicked out. So you just need to you need to schedule recording in after hours with me. It needs to be done typically a week ahead of time. Recording is a big deal. So we one day ahead of time for something. Oh, I want to do something in after hours, but recording has to be something that we really think about. So we should not do it randomly. So there you go. Next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania is up next. He says DMX lighting consoles are in short supply due to the chip shortages. Till the inventory improves, can a software-based system with a USB to DMX interface be a solution? And if so, what software does the panel recommend?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Sadly, I put the link in for the ETC student setup that we recommended all the time. It's a great little setup, $250, and you literally can use it the rest of your life. The software even gets updated. But unfortunately, if you go to the webpage, it says you can now get the software, but you don't get the dongle. You don't get the USB to DMX chip because they're in short supply. So I would recommend the ETC command software, but that recommendation without access to that little piece of USB to DMX is not a good recommendation.
Go ahead, John.
If you have a smaller system and you're a Mac person, Light Key 3 is the best solution on the market for specifically for Macs. But just like Roscoe said, the encoders, which will convert your DMX back to network, are in short supply. I use the NTAC, and I think Alex has the DMX King. So that's the recommendation.
And those are hard to get right now. As far as that,
the one that I have has been sold out. I don't know about the DMX King.
Yeah, I'll have to go look. And Chauvet makes another one as well. So there's a couple different options. One thing I learned is make sure that you know whether your lights are going to be 5-pin or 3-pin. So I picked the wrong one. So I have a lot of adapters now. So anyway, to take that into account. Also, a lot of us have been playing with Isadora as a way to talk to those DMX outputs. So you can also take a look at that. All right, let's jump into the next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next, and he says, what portable SSDs does the panel prefer? I'm looking at the Samsung X5 2 terabyte SSD, and he's got a link there for it.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I'm stuck with, well, stuck is not a good term. I'm on the T5 SSDs from Samsung. Two reasons: I bought the bracket that's shaped exactly like the T5s, and they haven't burned me yet. And so I just keep, when something does what I want it to do and it hasn't given me any issues to this point, I just keep going with it to where I'm kind of like Alex. I now have a stack of them.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeffrey. Can't hear you. Did we lose Jeffrey? Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, just because the number is higher from a T5 to a T7 doesn't mean that the T7 is better than the T5. There's a completely different way that they write to those T7s. So T5s are the place to go. They're the best one to use.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I'm in the T5 club as well, although I am thinking more and more as NVMe comes on that somebody's going to crack the code for making them function like these. They are much smaller. They're just a different technology, and I think that eventually they're going to go in that direction. So while I have these and I love these and they work perfectly, and I would highly recommend if you're going to do certain things, particularly like write-off from a Blackmagic camera, these work perfectly, and some others don't.
Yeah, I find the T5s to be really convenient because they slide right into my cages that I got, the small rig cages that I have, that I put the T5s into them really nicely. So I use it for that. For the larger records that I do, I use NVMEs because I need more speed than the T5s. So the NVMEs get me into the 800 megs, through the cable off the camera without too much trouble. So that's kind of the approach that I take there. All right, next question.
Simon Ray is up next from Shrewsbury in the UK, and he says, what's the process for unsubscribing from the daily emails without canceling the meeting registration? He signed up several times with different email addresses, and so he currently gets duplicate emails every day.
I don't, you just unsubscribe and you'll just cancel it for that email. So you can, if you've got 3 of them, just unsubscribe to 2 of them. I just have them sent to a folder. I very rarely unsubscribe things. I just filter them somewhere. But yeah, you could just unsubscribe those emails. I don't think there's any way to not get the emails and be connected to the event. So I think I don't know of any way to do that. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida is up next. He says, can you recommend a small LED Fresnel light to use as a backlight for a home Zoom setup? Lower cost options are preferred. And he says, thanks.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I don't know about the lower cost thing because a focusable Fresnel is pretty pricey. About the cheapest one I could find is this one on B&H, which is $264. That is focusable. It is Fresnel and it is LED. It is, however, daylight balanced. And I don't know if they make it in a. The curious thing is on the back, it showed a color temperature on the LCD panel with 5600, but it seems if they have a meter on the back of it, it would seem to be adjustable, but all the documentation says daylight, so maybe they make a tungsten. The other possibility would be to go with track lighting. If you're looking for track lights, you could put in track lights, something like this, replace an overhead fixture, and then you could aim them at the back of your head if you're anywhere near the middle of the room, and you could use the other track lights to illuminate your background, put little colored gels on them, or change the color temperature.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I've used Courtney's trick, and it actually does work well. You don't really need Fresnels, and Fresnels are a funny thing. I mean, the Fresnel is the lens. The light itself often comes with them, and we've been using Fresnel lights in small, like 150-watt tungsten Fresnels since the dawn of time for these small jobs. One thing to watch out for, most LEDs these days until the last 2 years were little panel arrays of small beads. These kind of lenses do not work with those. You need a single source, and so that's commonly called a cob or a chip-on board LED that they will work with. I had, and this is interesting to me because you'll notice that lens on the front of that top unit, which is a plug-on Fresnel lens for an Apter light in this case, but the idea is that any light that can put out a focused beam, you can add a Fresnel lens to it and get the Fresnel effect. The Fresnel effect itself is really cool because it is a light that can be focused but still has soft edges on the front of it, and it cuts beautifully. So used with barn doors and things like that, you have great control over where your light hits and where it does not spill, which can be critical in things like getting a saturated color for your background. Good lights.
Yeah, and for Fresnels, for LEDs, I use the Nanlite Forzas, Forza 60s. You can get a 60 or a 60B. They're still in that kind of $300 range, but they're pretty good quality. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, I found one 14-inch MacBook Pro with a 1 terabyte SSD and a 10-core M1 Max, along with a 16-inch MacBook Pro with a 10-core M1 Pro and a 2 terabyte SSD. Which would you prefer for audio work with space-hungry sample libraries?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, I would always, opt if I'm doing a lot of file switching. I always want more storage locally, but I would defer and refer you to, I put a link in for the Sweetwater Sound, has a really good article just on where to store files when you're working in a digital audio workstation, a DAW. And I think I'd defer to that. They would say put it on, because those samples tend to be larger files, 2 terabytes may not even last you very long. So you may want to go ahead and get some high-speed external storage would be the recommendation.
Yeah, I tend to get small storage on my laptops and then get large storage, somewhere else. To Roscoe's point, I find that to be a lot more transportable. Then if you need to move to another computer, you're not trying to figure out how to unwrap that all. You just kind of move it over. It's really useful. Next question.
Tom Ferguson's up next from Phoenix, Arizona. He says, Alex spoke about an eSports arena of the future, perhaps something like ABBA, I believe the Swedish rock megastars, is building, and he's got a link there.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I worked recently over at Riot Games, and they have an arena themselves that they built at their LA campus for broadcasting, streaming competition, which is a pretty good size arena with a stage that's all rigged out with big LED wall and multiple stations for the gamers. And I went to their website today to see if I could find a picture of it. I couldn't. But I did notice, as I scroll down, Los Angeles open positions, they're hiring if you're a game programmer. They have 355 open positions in Los Angeles.
It's building up fast. Go ahead, John.
Yes, I wanted to kind of just give a briefing. I watched this ABBA video. It was fantastic. So they did metahumans on them and made them all look young, and then they throw them into Unreal probably. But there's a lot of activity going on in the Strip. Luxor kicked out Chris Angel, and they turned his showroom into an e-gaming arena. And then one of the other hotels down on Fremont Street actually changed one of their rooms into e-gaming. So they're really catering to the young kids and moving into this space. As Alex kind of foreshadowed, this is growing and growing in Vegas.
Yeah, I did watch the ABBA thing earlier. That's the advantage of asking these questions early, is it gives us time to actually look at them. So just a reminder, ask the questions early. But I thought it was really interesting. Yeah, that's ILM. Probably not MetaHumans, but ILM is building those out the way they would do digital characters. And it looks like what they're doing is actually a LED wall with the characters on it. But what they're really doing is integrating the lights in the theater with the, really integrating that with their digital selves. So to kind of create that 3D effect as if you were there. So that they kept on talking about the lights, near the end. And so I realized what they were doing is really, it's just a projection, or not a projection even, just a video rendered, probably not anything real time. And I think that this is all just a movie with some lights. Like, just to be clear, a movie of them being younger with some lights. And so that's what this is. And I think it could be really fun to watch. But it's not. It's a lot of CG, but I don't think it's anything groundbreaking from the technology perspective, other than integrating it all. The thing that I'm talking about is a new kind of game, regardless of what venue we watch it in. The games right now, I believe, are too complicated, and so it's just hard for people. It's like watching. To me, it's like watching cross country skiing. I just can't keep track of where they are, what they're supposed to be doing. I only saw that for a second, and I was like, this is too complicated. So, I think that, for what we talked about before, for about 2,000 or 3,000 years, we've gone to a coliseum and watched people hash it out. It's gotten much more tame than it used to be, but I think that there's something about that shared experience where you can see the whole thing at one time. And that's what we don't have yet in esports. And I think that if they do it, they often do it in a weird way. Like, the problem with esports right now is that they're being developed by gamers rather than people who just want to build a sport, that's digital. And I think that that's when we move past that, we'll start to get some pretty interesting sports. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me. And you triggered it when you were talking about that. I haven't seen the ABBA thing yet, but I was thinking about that in relation to Get Back, which was so successful in taking early film footage of the Beatles and bringing that into the modern era through through work. And I'm just wondering if that 60s thing is kind of the beginning of that era, and if we'll see more of that as we're going on, that the acts that have imagery in reserve back, and whether it's that Guns N' Roses era or something a little beyond that and up to now, and nowadays every touring act. I mean, Billie Eilish must have millions of hours of stuff accessible from every fan that's been in every audience, who's done clips, who could eventually upload it. It's an interesting thing to see what creative works about performers and artists who have been successful will morph into as we go into the future. It's going to be a whole different world, I think.
Yeah, and I do think that the way we watch performances, whether it's esports or concerts, is going to change. We're already starting to see things like, the Beatles had a kind of a live presentation with, an open live to IMAX theaters a couple weeks ago, and Kanye played to 37 theaters in December live. So that's 37 theaters full of people watching a concert. And so I think that the way we distribute these and the way we enjoy them is going to keep changing. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tom Ferguson again. And Tom in Phoenix, Arizona says, when entering a question in Mukana, is there a way to add an attachment, diagram, or photo?
No, we don't have that right now. We will eventually, but we don't have it at the moment. There's just a lot of other fires on the horizon for us to put out before we do that one. But the problem with that is it's not just adding the attachment; it's protecting us from what you add. So we've had things in the very early days. We had things where people added a lot of images that were not appropriate. So it's not as simple as it seems. Most people would just add the nice things that they want to talk about, but there'll be a handful of people that won't. And so building that into the system takes a lot more than just adding the ability to do it. Next question.
Alex, I'm sorry, I just had a crash in my question panel. So can somebody grab it for a minute?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead. I can go ahead and do it. Next question is from David Brady. He said, recently scored an N.I.B. ECam Z1 on eBay, looking to swap out my Lumix GX-85. Does the panel have any input feedback on this camera body? I'm just the only one I guess I couldn't find that one really quickly when I did a search for it. It didn't seem to show up. I'm assuming you're just meaning the Z-Cam One. And if that's the case, it's a great camera. You should be able to. It should look really good. I don't have any. I believe it's the box camera, so it's kind of modular. We used to use them for some stereo rigs and some other stuff that we did there. But I don't have a lot of other than it's a good solid camera. I don't have a lot of other input for it, but I can't wait to see you use it. Are you ready, Bill?
Yeah, I am. It came back. Thank you very much. This one comes from Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. He says, suggest an after-hours session for tips on reading questions. Do you agree, and what kind of tips?
We can definitely do an after-hours discussion. I mean, right now, for our producers, by the way, this will be a short show, or we'll jump to the Super Bowl graphics early. It's not a ton of questions for the first hour. So if you want to ask questions, this is a great day to do it. As far as tips go, I mean, I think that I'll give a couple really quickly just from watching the whole thing. Is that one thing is that you want to add energy to it. You just, I think that there's sometimes a little bit of timidness in reading them that you kind of have to project. I think a lot of us that have worked in radio are kind of used to that. I prefer not to add anything except for emotion to the words. So unless something's misspelled or rewritten, I won't add anything to the name. I won't put any context to it. I just read the name and location, but I do it, and I try to do it in an expressive sort of way, but I don't add anything to it. And then, so those are the big things. And then the other thing is just being waiting to come right in. You have to open up your mic before we finish the question so that you can cut it off. I think sometimes when people get started, they're constantly unmuting their mic before they talk, and it creates this 2-second gap every single time. So those are some of the things that I would suggest. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and a couple of things that I usually do is read ahead, read the next question while the previous question's being answered to make sure you know how to pronounce the name, and translate any acronyms that you don't know or that the audience may not know if it's unfamiliar. If we always use AH and for after hours and OH for office hours, and I expand those out into their full words. And also, if there's an acronym that you can explain what that is, or use the full name instead of the lettered acronym.
Go, Bill.
Yeah, and just from somebody who does this a lot here, you just have to read for sense rather than reading for the words, and know that sometimes you can add a little bit of interpretation in the next question coming up. We have a quote. How much are you going to pull that out and make it sound like a quote as opposed to just a continuation of what's in the words in front of you? It's something you get better at just as you do it. That's kind of all live announcing, and announcing from copy like this is all about.
Next question, but we can definitely do an after hours discussion and go from there as well. So we'll figure that out. Yeah. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Thank you. I think that one of the important things is you don't have to be a radio guy or a voiceover artist to read the questions. I think that we want to encourage anyone that has an interest in doing this, and no matter where you are in the country or out there in the world, put your 2 cents in. We just want to give you a little input on how to best do it.
Yeah, so we'll schedule a second session for people who are interested in it. Absolutely. Next question.
Patrick Shones in Little Rock, Arkansas says, what happened to Zoom's pin to second screen option? I only get pin to first screen, even with dual screen active. I was away from Zoom for about 6 months doing in-person events, and things changed.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I can actually do a pin to second screen. If you're a producer, well, technically you shouldn't get that second screen if you're in producer mode. You just get whatever is fed to you by the cutter. But the other thing is if you're in a regular meeting and somebody has spotlighted a person to the front, you will not be able to pin to second screen at that point. Once the spotlight is released, then you should be able to pin back and forth. Other than that, not exactly sure, and there's no setting or anything like that I've ever run across that says that you can't do that.
Yeah. I haven't tried to. I typically am pinning to first screen, so I haven't tried it the second screen, so evidently we can't do it. So I have pinned to second screen. That's interesting. I just looked at mine. I have pinned to first screen, pinned to second screen. Maybe a setting on your end, because I can tell you right now that my system says I can pin to both screens. So that could be a setting inside your system. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Matt Wood in Newcastle upon Tyne in England. What is a good way to host an asynchronous Q&A for a week-long online event? He's looking to link to a tool like Sli.do, but with participants asking questions over the course of a week or so, along with the facility to display answers.
I think Sli.do is probably not a bad solution for that, to take those in. We've taken them in a lot of different ways. We've literally given people links for Twitter. We've given them an email that they could submit it to. You can build a Google form to submit those to. So those are, when you're talking about asynchronous and you don't have to do it in real time, it's pretty easy to find ways to give people access to it. The hard part is managing it in real time. So a Google form, email, web form, Sli.do, all of those would allow people to submit those questions in. The question is, do you want them to vote on them? Do you want them to interact? So those are the other things to think about, but they're all pretty straightforward as far as that goes. And then it's just a matter of figuring out where you're going to put it and whether you're going to reply to them via text or whether you're going to reply to them via video. I used to do a thing long before we had the bandwidth or we had Zoom. Within the Pixel Core, I did a thing called Ask Alex, and people would just send in questions. And I would, every couple days, it's kind of like office hours, but it was just me and it was just a recording. I'd put it up and people would listen to it. So that's another way to, you could get a group together that's doing it every so often. Next question.
Chris Taylor in Carlsbad, California is up next with this. Without having an ATEM Mini, what's the best way to play video in a Zoom webinar without using shared screen? And he notes share screen reduces the size of the video to allow for thumbnails of presenters.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, without having an ATEM Mini, you're going to need something to artificially present itself to Zoom as a camera. And so there's Magewell, there are the boxes, some of the boxes from Blackmagic Design work where you can put SDI or HDMI. I'm sorry. Definitely stop that. And so you have a device that needs to fake being a camera. The other thing is make sure that you're running your meeting at a high resolution. So if you can bump in there with I'm trying to think, Facebook portal to bump the resolution up to 720p, because you want to make sure you're not running things at a low resolution. I'll let someone else jump in.
There you go, Dennis.
Yeah, I think probably the simplest way is to use virtual camera software, something like OBS. You can make that your camera, feed your webcam to it by default, but when you want to play the video, just switch to a different scene and it will automatically play the video into the meeting.
Yeah, I personally use Mimo Live for that. So when I'm doing smaller events or smaller things that I want to control, I'll use Mimo to load up the videos that I'm going to play out, the stills that I'm going to play out, and any other bits and pieces that I need to push through. Those are for the really small events that I might do as a one-person show. But it works well. So similar to OBS or a variety of other tools that might give you that. The Mimo Live is probably a little bit more stable on the Mac than OBS, but outside of that, they're very similar in that sense. Next question.
So our friend Tony Mobley in Newton, Georgia is up next. He says, I was wondering if there is a chance that Office Hours would become an application or platform like YouTube, maybe an Office Hours 5.0.
There's definitely a chance. So we'll leave it at that for now. Next question.
Dale Nabita in Oakland, California says, what's your opinion on the new DJI 4D Ronin?
I haven't gotten to play with it yet. I'm super impressed. So the DJI 4D Ronin, for those of you who haven't seen it, is DJI basically took everything that they had kind of figured out between stabilizers and lenses and cameras and LiDAR and everything else. They put it all into one camera. So what you have is a camera that can stabilize itself and as well as all the bounce, as well as rotate. You can control it. It's got a wireless transmission and a wireless control. So you can have someone else controlling that camera from a long distance because, of course, they're doing all these drone shots. So they understand how to transmit over a very long distance and how to transmit that video back. So they've got great wireless support for it built into the camera. They also have LiDAR, which means that it can do autofocus. You can just pick somebody and it'll just keep them in frame, and it's doing LiDAR, so it's figuring it out on, all the time. If you want to manually control it, you can actually see on a display, you can see where that person is. You can see the LiDAR sensing where that person is and actually do the manual so that way you can do things like rack focuses and so on and so forth on your own, but really have an understanding of where people are when you do it. So you're not guessing, going, I'm going to go from this feed. You see a display, you'll see one person and the other person, and then you can just go from this one to that one. So it looks super powerful. It's got the higher end rig, I think, is going to eventually go up to 8K. I think the one that they're releasing is, I believe 6K is the first one, but it looks super impressive. I haven't seen it in the wild, and I'm wondering whether they're having supply issues because they aren't talking about it very much. They talked about it a lot when they released it, and then no one is talking about it now, and no one seems to have one except for a handful of them that bounced around for demos. So I'm wondering whether that if they're actually being produced. I think the cost is like 15 grand. So for that kind of camera, it's a pretty good deal. So I'm just wondering whether they're actually able to make them right now, but it looks super impressive. There's a great Corridor Digital does a great overview of it. I would highly recommend that on YouTube. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Keenan Campbell in Princeton, Illinois. And Keenan says, Alex, what's the status of the studio upgrade?
I stalled for a minute because I was like, number one is I ran out of my allowance, the money that I could spend on it. So I was like, I got to wait for a minute. And then using that time, I've kind of been kind of fiddling around with how I want to put this thing together. And so I'm kind of making a list of the different things I want it to be able to do. One is obviously have a physical background. Another one is to be able to drop either a green screen or a gray screen behind. Another piece is being able to push I want to be able to push a monitor behind me so that I can use that as a background as well. So I've been trying to figure out how it all fits into this room to make this work. So, but I'm getting much closer to that, and we'll probably bring that back up in a couple weeks, and we'll discuss where we're at. I've got a new model that I've been working on, so we'll take a look at that probably not next week, but the week after. Next question.
Srikanth Suram in Chennai, India is up next, and he says, what is the panel's preferred return channel for SRT remote productions?
I don't know if we have the people. Does anyone here have an opinion about that return channel? I think that the main, and I'm assuming that it's just a matter of how are you going to get back? And what I would say is that the problem with SRT right now is that it's a little high, the latency is a bit higher. So what I would probably do is be looking at trying to, you got an open mic, Bill. I would be looking at something that's lower latency for the return. So something like a Zoom or a Stream Voodoo or something else that's going to give you a very low latent return would probably be better to try to cut that cycle down just a little bit. Next question.
Keenan Campbell in Princeton, Illinois has a question. Can John Pretto give us an update on the large office hours space.com production?
Go ahead, John.
Keenan's throwing me under the bus, huh? So it's T-minus 31 days out. The physical construction of the rocket is primarily finished. There's just a few small things to do. Right now, we've been working on the telemetry, and we've got these boards 3D printed. They look metallic, but they're not. They're just PLA. This is the backup flight computer, and this will be mounted inside the computer. And here's the primary. So we're actually doing the transmitting from this primary computer down to a receiver on a Yagi antenna, and then that's fed into a Mac, and then we're grabbing the packets, and then we're parsing them out, and then we're throwing them over to Tuomo. And we're in the middle of that process. Another, 2 weeks, and we should be done with that. Tuomo created a really, really cool live tower, I call it, to feed the live graphics into. It's really, really neat. And so everything's on track and going well. And we got about 20 people that said they're coming out to the Dry Lake. So thanks, Keenan, for asking. Oh, you got it. Great.
We got the patch.
Alex. Yeah.
Got the patch. We got the patch. Yeah.
If you guys want a patch, hit me up on Discord. I got about 50 left.
Very good. You should get it. It's our first one. All right. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, they're awesome. And it's driving me crazy because that month, March, is very big for production. So I'm desperate for a hole to show up so that I can drive out and do this. I'm looking forward to it. I think this is one of the most interesting things that the office hours teams and people just peripherally involved with it has done. This should be fabulous.
Next question.
Next one comes from Andy Wagner in Brooklyn, New York, and he says, does the panel have recommendations or thoughts on cloud-based switchers, for example, Vizrt, Easylive, or others?
I think the one that most people are using right now in our group is vMix. So vMix has been the one that I think most people, when they're doing those, Vizrt is another vector. I think is the production platform for that. And it's just expensive. So a lot of the online ones are, you really have to know what you're doing or what you're going to be doing to make that work. So anyway, yeah. So I think that's been the challenge, but I think that for the cost analysis, I think that Vizrt is pretty good. Yeah, go ahead. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next with, what alternatives to Loopback do you recommend for audio routing on Mac OS specifically?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I do it old-fashioned. I have a mixer behind me that has all the discrete outputs that allows me to play around with Loopback and where I want it to go.
Next question.
Next one comes from Srikanth Suran again, this from Chennai. Recommendations for a 2-channel SRT encoder.
I admit the only ones that I've used for SRT encoders have been the HiVisions. So the HiVisions are the ones that we've used, and it's not necessarily the least expensive solution, but I don't think I have any other. Bill, you got an open mic still, yeah. Yeah. So that's the HiVision one's the only one that I've used successfully. But there's probably a couple other ones. I think the one that we were talking about the other day that I didn't like the older ones, but I can't think of the name of it right now. I've kind of put it out of my mind. Anyway, we'll come back to it. Next question.
Jeffrey Powers, Madison, Wisconsin's up next. If not full frame, what sensor size is acceptable to you for your productions?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
I've been using the Blackmagic Design Micro Four Thirds in the Micro Studio camera, and it's very nice. I mean, it's the lenses cost less. I'm using, this is for student use as well as production use. So I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
3/4 inch, sub magic size.
3/4 inch or 4/3?
See, that's the dyslexia coming out. Yes.
Yeah, there you go, 4/3. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and I think they're all useful. Depends on what you want to do. I remember circumstances where working with a particular sensor, like I used to shoot theater productions, and in a low light situation, opening up a large aperture gives you such a narrow depth of field that literally it becomes almost impossible to track somebody who's working upstage versus downstage and keep them both in focus. So smaller sensor sizes and smaller, more focused lenses will get you more depth of field, all other things being equal. So I don't think it's always one thing. Everybody loves that big full frame, I can get shallow depth of field, but sometimes that same thing, which is very desirable for a look, can fight you really hard if you're shooting something other than a shot that requires narrow depth of field.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and you might have to use an anamorphic lens if you want to utilize that full frame sensor in a widescreen situation. So bear that in mind. Micro Four Thirds is good for most people, I think.
I will say that probably for my productions, 95% are Super 35. Like that is like 95, like some version of Super 35 is where I think Micro Four Thirds works fine. But I do like the slightly shorter depth of field, but not the full frame. So the Super 35 is kind of halfway between the two as far as that goes. The only time I switch to a smaller chip than Super 35 is when I go into a camera that has to throw over 75 feet. And then I go down to 2/3 because I want more depth of field back. So those cameras. And that's why a lot of times I like to mix and match the Black Magics because it's the same color science. So it's easier for me to shade them together. So the cameras in the back will be a 2/3 inch chip, and the cameras, everything shorter than 75 feet will be the Super 35s, and I don't have to deal with multiple color spaces. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next. He says, for an upcoming in-person event, I set up a birdog Flex 4K backpack to power the camera. Has anyone used it for a camera and a monitor?
I don't think anybody has. Well, it sounds like an interesting solution, but I think you might have stumped us. I don't think we've used it. Next question.
Chris Taylor is up next from Carlsbad, California. And Chris says, Alex, I agree that for an adult watching an eSports event, the content is very difficult to understand. But there are more kids watching eSports than all the other sports. How do the adults level up?
I just think that it's going to be the kids are watching it and that's fine. But I mean, they're not the numbers when we say all the kids. I mean, the numbers of on esports is still a tiny fraction of live viewers compared to physical sports. And so I think that I don't think that I don't think the adults. I don't think it's going to matter. I think that someone's going to come out with one that's a Coliseum style, and it's going to run over everything else. The adults won't have to. Like I just think that's it's someone's going to do this, and it's just gonna plow everybody else under. And that's what happens. Is a lot of people have odd ways of doing things, and then somebody comes through and just plows over all the odd ways of doing it with a more straightforward way, and people complain about it because now it doesn't have whatever it had. But that's what we see over and over again. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so this is coming from a dad who watched my son go through this kind of curve in terms of the number of inputs he could handle simultaneously. And I think I've mentioned before on Office Hours that I was watching him one day when he was watching TV kind of through the corner of his eyes. He was on his laptop. He had a cell phone in a conversation with a girlfriend. He had something else going on. I thought, my gosh, the kid is managing like 5 incoming streams of data and switching between them almost seamlessly. And I realized that it would have driven me crazy to do that. Now, that said, I do think as you age, you get to the point where you learn to more focus on the thing at hand. And sometimes that distraction stuff drives people, the same person who might have been perfectly fine with that 5 years ago, it will drive them crazy as their life changes. So I think these things are just in flux.
It's just the nature of what I will say is that there is a point where there's the nature of the way our brain works. I mean, doing 5 different things is doing them all kind of partially. So and so it creates just kind of this broken up experience that I think people still miss a unified shared experience. That's why people want to go back to physical things. And I don't think they need to do that, but I do think that there's a power to people all doing something at the same time, that has something that's deeper than just people learning how to do something new. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, you have to become addicted to Red Bull or Monster Energy drinks and Doritos.
It's just that when you're constantly switching, you're just constantly putting commas in. You're just comma, and it's I used to do a lot of things all at one time, and I've learned to every year I learned to do less at one time, and I'm it just, you get it done better. So it's and again, I think it's a limitation of the human brain and the human experience, and I think that we can learn to do it some other way, but I think that. I do think that, again, I think that this is a weak point in the market right now. And people think that there's a lot of people because they can fill a stadium, but they can't fill, eSports could not fill, 15 stadiums every weekend for every year. Like that's the difference. It's just, the scale is entirely different, and so doing it every once in a while and being able to fill a stadium it's cute. so it's not the, and I think, again, someone's going to figure this out and they're going to unlock it, and then we'll remember all the other weird things that we did before. Next question.
Stephen Montana, it looks like, in Madison, Wisconsin, and says suggestions for dealing with shallow workspaces, those without a lot of background depth, how to dress the space and how to light to avoid looking too flat against your backing.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
And when you say too flat against your background, I guess what you mean is bokeh or depth of field. My room here is behind me is about 7 feet to the back wall. And if you watch the Sony autofocus go into effect,
Yep.
You get a good idea what it's doing in order to compensate for that. I experimented with some lenses and some settings and even some cameras. And the best to have some kind of a zoom lens. So you're going to find it 35 millimeters, sort of the sweet spot that you're going to hit. And if the camera is set correctly and the lens isn't closed off too far, you're going to get this nice bokeh behind. But I got a lot of real estate left to right that I'm dealing with horizontally. So that's what I would do.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, if you don't have a room behind you, like the depth, one possible solution is to buy about a 55-inch, which is a sweet spot for cheap 4K TVs, and put a 4K monitor, 55 or 60-inch, behind you so that you don't see the bezel; it's completely framed out. And then you can put on that, on that TV, you can put a graduated background. You can put an external scene, any kind of virtual background. You can apply a little Gaussian blur to it in Photoshop, and it'll look like a room behind you. And you'd be surprised that a lot of stuff you see on cable news and so on that's all it is. Their whole studio is basically a 55 or a 70-inch TV behind a person sitting at a desk in about 3 feet of depth.
Yeah, I've had a hard time getting less than 70 inches to work consistently, for a screen. And that has to do with the framing, the zoom, and where you put the camera, and also Moray, in the actual, so the math for me has always been about 70. We've gotten away with it at 65, but it has been, we found the smaller screens to be a little painful. And we see the results of those really small screens in Sunday morning talk shows, because you'll see the reflection of the person, in it, and they're obviously smacked right up against it. And it's
you have to angle it down just a little bit to avoid the reflections of the light, and also, 55. And also make sure it's a 4K panel to get the tighter dot pitch to avoid the moray.
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
And not that barn doors come on inexpensive lights, but if you can slice light in behind you from an angle from the side, you can create different shadow depths, if I can use that term. So I mean, something might be a darker gray as you go farther back, and that will just create the sense of depth. But any kind of lighting that you'll have to be able to control that lighting. What we would call barn doors, you might have to come up with black wrap, which is just tin foil that's been painted black. Don't wrinkle it, but just keep it nice and straight. You can probably make some barn doors.
Good, Bill.
One of the things that is helping us, in the old days, the cameras didn't absorb light that well, so you had to have a lot of light. These new CCD cameras and the new chip on board cameras and all, there's all sorts of higher sensitivity ways to record, which means that you can use less light and get the same exposures than you used to be. And so now it is possible, instead of lighting from a distance, to light up close. I think most of us have some sort of little panel light that's not too far away from us. In my case, I have a couple of them that are literally arm's length. I'm touching my left light right now. That would be unusual in the past because I have a camera centered and you can't see any of that. So use what's here, which is lower power lights closer to you, still out of your camera shot, and you will have less problems with spill on the back end just because of how physics works. The light's going to fall off in terms of the inverse square principle, so doubling the distance from the light to your face and in from your light to the background means you're going to have 4 times less. Tripling it means 9 times less behind you. So you can use that basic function to figure out, get lights that are as big as you can, as close as you can, and then you'll light the background separately, and you'll be able to get some of that even in a relatively short throw, which is what people are facing now, being in 10 by 10 offices all the time for this stuff.
Yeah, and 10 by 10 is relatively easy. It depends on how short that throw is. So if you tell us in another question exactly what the geometry of the room is, we'll come up with a solution. When I deal with people right up against a wall, I try to actually use, I kind of give up on really lighting them the way I'd want to. And I aim for big China balls, or, to Bill's point, very large sources that are not going to show a big shadow of them right up against the wall. I love using gray backgrounds because it just lets them stick out a little bit and doesn't feel like this kind of just white wall behind them. So those are some of the things to think about there. This is where larger sensors make a big difference to soften that up a little bit. So going to a full frame sensor is going to buy you some, like it just feels like it's a little blurry behind you as opposed to it, or at least a Super 35. But that's going to help you create, the larger that sensor, the more depth you have. But let us know what the geometry actually is of the room and how much, when you say shallow, are you up against the wall, like it's the wall right behind you, or is there 2 feet or 3 feet behind you? All of that makes a big difference. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next. He says, for those that can't participate in person for the office hours space process, how can they help support it?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Just if you have a niece, nephew, cousin, son, daughter, write and learn about OH space, what's going on, and write an article for them. And I'll let John's right behind me. There's been requests from the Girl Scouts for some curriculum. There's been requests and so I put in a thing. I call this OHARP. I threw that out there. This is to me like a DARPA thing. There's so much going on here: telemetry, rocketry, being out in the desert, ecology. And community. At the end of the day, it's all about community. But there are so many articles to be written about this. So take a little time, study it, write an article so that we can develop curriculum. That article will become curriculum for the Girl Scouts or something like that.
Go ahead, John.
Alex is crazy because our community has really stepped up, and we've got about 50 people that said that they wanted to help. We've got 20 people coming. We've got about 30 people active in our weekly meetings. We have a Discord, and so if you want to be part of that conversation, hit me up in Office Hours Discord, and I'll let you guys over there. We've got a ton of stuff over there where we organize all of our graphics and et cetera. But we've had anonymous donors. We've had donors. We crazy paid for shirts. It's just been amazing, and I thank everybody in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Eduardo Agustin in Panama is up next. He says, which solutions can I use for a Telestrator? Any whiteboard software recommendations?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So, of course, you have the Wacom and everything like that. I've used a program, and especially with now these portable monitors having touchscreen ability for Windows, I also have a laptop, multi 2-in-1 type laptop I can take apart and set it right on the table. There's a program I've talked about before called Panimation, which is a Telestrator that also uses NDI, so it'll bring your video in. You could do the telestration and then push it back out to software switching, of course, or a hardware solution if you've got it all configured right. So that's what I use every now and then for that. Other than that, I'll just pull open, anything that has a green screen ability to it and a drawing board and use it that way, and then just crop out any edges that might give it a dirty video feed.
Yeah, the one that I'm using is just this is just white over or black over white. So if I cut to it, and you'll see the color still in it, but you'll see me drawing this. Oops, let me cut to that. So this is me drawing on the whiteboard. Now it's actually black. It's just being filled in by the key, but it's just a whiteboard that is that's there. And then when it's keyed over in the teleprompter, or in the ATEM, it is a Telestrator. So that's how that one actually works. So anything that's going to generate a white signal. The big thing is that the trick to the whole thing is that the Wacom tablet is talking via USB to the Mac Mini. The Mac Mini goes into the ATEM, and the ATEM goes into the Wacom tablet. So you're seeing the program, the finished program. So that's how I can write on it, and that's how it acts as a Telestrator. Next question.
Ron Reuter in Omaha, Nebraska says, how does Alex know Bill's mic is open? I don't hear it.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
He's mental. No, he's listening very carefully to his earphones. He can hear it.
Yeah, I will admit that what I hear in the show has been a little bit more overwhelming since I've got these little Linsols. I can hear a lot more than I could with my little ear things, and so I can just hear people breathing mostly. So anyway, next question.
Next one comes to us from Eduardo Agustin again in Panama. He says, has anyone used other tablets besides the Wacom One for Telestrator features in their stream? What about the HUION KAMVAS Pro 16 or 13?
Go ahead, John.
I use my iPad Pro for Telestration, but like Alex says, it does not give you the return video feed on the, so you're kind of guessing where you're drawing. But I use Procreate to draw on there with the green screen, and I bring that via NDI into OBS and then chroma key it out.
I think that the only thing when I look at these look like good things. I will admit that the Wacom One is proven for me, and the Wacom One dropped the price dramatically, so it's about the same price as the one you're showing, the HUION KAMVAS. So the Wacom One is competitive price wise, and I will say, as someone who's used a lot of different tablets, if the price isn't significantly different, I would just use a Wacom. Or Wacom, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, but I would use that because it's at the same price. It's just a very, very well known, 30 years of experience kind of tablet. So I think that's a great way to go. Next question.
Todd Davis in Hutchinson, Kansas is up with this. Last night I was streaming a city council meeting work session, and one of the council members chose to wad up every piece of paper in the world. I could only nod my head and laugh. Describe a funny audio blunder that you have had.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Aha, audio blunders 101. If you want to get him back, if he's wearing a wireless mic, don't turn it off when he has to take a bathroom break, because that's what I did once, and it was very embarrassing.
I did that in front of 1,500 people. Anyway, Courtney.
Yeah, one trick we used to play on each other when in radio, I used to do news on an FM channel, and the disc jockey in the other room constantly, as I'm reading the news, and I have headphones on, as I'm reading the news, at every pause, he would go.
That's not right.
It was disgusting.
Go ahead, Bill.
So you should always wear your headphones on your own signal. I had a circumstance, I'll do this really quickly. I was videotaping, and I was actually the sound guy for Casey Martin, who was the golfer who had a disability, and they were trying to figure out whether they're going to let him play on the pro tour and take a cart because of his disability. Anyway, we were out at a country club, and we were shooting B-roll, and he had a line to say, so we had live sound, and I needed to hear the golf ball and things like that. And then even though I was using really good equipment, electrosonics and stuff like that, every so often I would hear this sound that would go by, and it was driving me crazy. And I tried everything. I switched out mics, I switched out batteries, I switched out body packs. Every random period of time, this thing would come by, and I had never heard it before. And it finally got in and it killed one of my takes, and it drove me crazy all day long, and we just had to live with it. I got the takes that we needed. As I was driving off, I went past the airport's radar tower. That's what was happening. And then it would go around and do the whole city and randomly come back around, and the radar hit would get into things. Just, you never know with sound. Drives you crazy.
There's a place called Lookout Mountain over Denver, Colorado, and the first time I went there, I was not playing a song, but I didn't even own the song that was coming out of my speakers. like, I was like, what is going on? And it turns out I was so close to the transmitters. There's so much transmission. There's one tower that just has all these transmitters that literally the wires in my system were picking up the radio channel so clearly without me even tuning to it that they just played it out of the speakers. And so I learned after that I went to the very quickly went to the not the bathroom, to the kitchen, and I asked for tinfoil, and I basically put tinfoil all over the entire back of my case. This has happened fortunately before the wedding started. And I put it all behind my DJ case and all over everything, and then it all went away. But it was the craziest thing I had ever seen when it comes to that code, Courtney.
That phenomenon is called rectification, and it happens in all analog audio equipment, amplification equipment, if you're near an AM transmitter, and that's where it can get into you. But I was trying to think of another. Now it went out of my head. Oh yes, it had to do with that. It was depicted perfectly in Spinal Tap. Was in a situation where I had a wireless receiver open, and I didn't know it. And then in that particular city, the taxi services was on the frequency of the wireless microphones, and so you'd hear taxi calls come in suddenly over the PA.
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, two. One is during a wedding, turned on that microphone that you put on to hear the vows right as the minister said, "Are you okay?" And everyone just laughed right as you're about to go into the vows. So that's not a good moment. And then the second one was same building. The local taxi cab frequency was the same as the wireless mic set, or would somehow. So if a taxi cab was driving by the church building, suddenly you'd get this, right through the system. That wasn't really a blunder, but it's just something that made people laugh.
Yeah. Last question for the first hour.
Last question, first hour. George Butters, Halifax, Nova Scotia. A new version of OBS was released earlier this week. Has anyone upgraded, and is there anything to share?
Go ahead, John.
I'm running it right now. It's funny you say that. I just upgraded yesterday out of Fluke. It came up and I installed it. They support for AJA devices, both input and output now, which is interesting. And then they also added blending modes like Photoshop has in it. So I'm going to play with that later today.
Great. Now we're changing subjects to our discussion about the Super Bowl graphics. I think the reason that it's important for us to look at these and look at graphics now and again, but from other people, is that we can learn a lot. Like, so if a client asks us, this is how I keep track. I keep a pretty large collection, and I throw it away all the time because I feel like graphics keep changing. What is cool today will not be cool tomorrow, or at least not in the next couple of years. And so I'm constantly kind of keeping track of what other people are doing for graphics. And it's nice because when you analyze it and when you look at it and you kind of tear it apart, you can you get it in your head of like, oh, that's an important piece, or oh, that's really interesting to do. And that really allows you to, when someone asks you to do it, you've thought about it. You've thought about the things that you like, and it's easier for you to come up with solutions. So I thought it'd be useful for us to do that. And so as we start this, go ahead and you can put questions in. Of course, I'm going to show a couple things. We'll do a little bit of show and tell, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So let me see here. So this is these clips are pretty much in sequential order from the beginning to the middle of the show. There was only a handful of things maybe near the end that I grabbed onto because I felt like we had gotten through most of the examples, and I also just felt like we weren't going to have time to go through any more. So anyway, so let me cut to this here. This is the background that's there, and so I believe that what we're looking at here is an LED wall that's behind them, which I think is done. I think it's done fairly well. Usually we are very against people using LED walls, but I think that they do a pretty good job here of setting that up, for that process. And so, but I think that that's pretty much all I'm looking at here. But I think it's a nice graphic. Obviously this is. Let me pull this over here. The thing to look at when you look at a lot of this stuff, and we'll look at it in a couple different places, is this 3D geometry is very complex, and it's really, really well designed. And you want to kind of look at the structure of it, look at how they're extruding these things out, look at the highlights that are down here. And we'll see this in a couple different places. But like nothing about this is by accident. When you look at the highlights going across here, a lot of times that takes a lot of work. It's not someone like just turned on a light and hit render. It is a lot of work to design, what those things look like, in that process. But I think overall, as far as an LED system, I don't know what the distance is. My guess is probably 8 feet, 6 to 8 feet behind them. And it is interesting. The only thing that I would love if this was a little softer compared to the foreground. I think that the big challenge you have with backgrounds is that the backgrounds, if they have the appearance of being sharper than the foreground or better lit, in this case, it looks a little brighter than they do. That's the only part that I tend to prefer to have it be behind them a little bit more. But I think overall it looks pretty good. Go ahead, Roscoe.
These appear to be the exact same graphics they used for broadcast. So would they have changed the design slightly, knowing it was going to be on an LED wall?
I don't think so. I think that they designed it for the LED wall. So this is probably its own look. And by the way, someone else is going to have to promote people to the next thing because of the synergy crash, I can only control one computer at a time. it's a bit. Here, we'll put it on here. Someone else just has to move those around. Anyway,
so you're saying you need somebody to move something on deck?
Yeah. I can't. Yeah, move people on deck, move the questions on deck. I can't do that.
Okay,
so,
I'll try.
Anyway, so go ahead, Bill.
Okay. My comment about this, the thing that surprises me is that your eye is always drawn first to the brightest thing on any screen. I think that's just part of how human beings are wired. And so the fact that they have 100% white, 255, 255, 255, both in the drop shadowish kind of things on those things, and also their shirts are probably reading that, means that their faces have to be substantially less than that. And now they may have decided to do that because honestly, and this is nothing against them, but the gentlemen in this have been doing this for a long time. And so to brightly light them up and make them foreground, maybe they thought that they looked a little aged or something like that. But I'm surprised that they allowed that much brightness not in the primary thing that they wanted to draw your eyes to.
It's funny. This is not really a graphics discussion, but the first thing I tell someone, they're like, what should I wear to be on air? And I was like, not white. Don't wear a white shirt. There's it's like that's the first thing I say. Blue, gray, those are all good colors. Do not wear a white shirt because you've now tied my feet to the ground. Go ahead, Courtney.
Are you sure that's an LED wall? Because I never saw that graphic change throughout maybe it did. I just didn't see it. But and if it didn't change, it could have been a translog or just a printed.
I think there's an earlier time. There's an earlier moment where it is where it's them in front of the crowd. so they're doing something else. I don't have that here, I don't think, but there's an earlier moment where there's actually a camera feed going in there. So that's why I think that it's an LED wall. So I think that I do think it is. And again, I think it's done pretty well. It's
maybe it's a crystal LED from Sony, those
or something. Yeah,
$1.5 screens.
You can also see. I mean, it's hard to tell with the compression that we have here as to whether the modeling that we're seeing here is coming from the LED wall or from the YouTube compression. Next one is we're going to jump to this a little bit. This is yay. Okay. This is something we talked about a lot, and there's actually a lot more going on in this logo when I got ready for this, when I was kind of analyzing it. So I still feel like the sweeper is too short. So I feel like the sweeper goes too short. But I didn't think it was actually doing a pure, like what you would typically expect from a sweeper or a stinger is to absolutely transition from one side to the other. And I didn't think it was going so fast. I didn't think it was, but it actually is. So here you can see it entering frame here. And it does the sweep very, very fast. And then it gives you a little bit of the outside. We're in LA. Look at the palm trees. This is a very complex sweeper. So a couple things that are going on. One is, it's cutting through there. But the other thing to look at is starting right there. See this frame? From this frame on, it's getting blurrier. They're blurring that layer in the render, which is not something that we can do with our little switchers. so that's a more complex projection of that. And then not only are they doing that, but then here they've now transitioned from the other side to an outdoor palm tree reflection. And then they've got, of course, all the other geometry and lights that are going on there. So it's actually a pretty complex transition that they're doing there. I think I was more impressed with it when I went frame by frame. Again, when we watch it in real time, I just felt like it it was every time I saw it, I was like, that's too fast. Like it doesn't, like it just by like it just felt like it jumped off really fast, and I felt like I wanted it to last at least another 5 or 10 frames. But yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I've been in control room kind of circumstances where you get the two constituencies. The graphic department has done something brilliant like that and took a lot of time and effort into it. And then a TD or whomever is in charge of that, the director perhaps, will go, no, I need more energy. So let's cut those transition lengths in half. And all of a sudden, all that work that the graphics team put into making those brilliant just gets blurred away in.
Yeah, I think it's this transition from this to this. Like it just, I think I wanted it to just be another like 4 or 5 frames to get there. But I will say that as I looked at it more, it's a pretty masterful, sweeper as far as how it looks there. It was pretty cool. You also want to look at like how they're using when you're studying this for future use, or for thinking about it. Just look at how they're using geometry here. So they've got these lines in 3D that are kind of stacked over top of the geometry. This is not a simple bevel. So you can see that right here, it comes up and then it goes over and then up and over. And so that's a more complex bevel there. And there's a little edge right along there that's catching. This is something that a lot of people don't get when they're building this, are these little catch lights, that are there. That means that there's at least a bevel, if not a little round in there, that's going to capture these highlights that go up the side. If you don't bevel that again, you're not going to get that. So this is not a a simple like we extruded it and we beveled it out. It's a more complex piece of geometry that's being used there. As we can probably talk about this in a couple different places, but this is a really as we start to look at this, there's a lot going on. This little piece here is like a master's course in lower thirds. So a couple things to look at is. I did like the rounded corners that they added here. That's kind of the style today. And then look at this little edge, this little highlight that they've done here, these little corners. They've blurred it a little bit, so it gives it that kind of translucent feel to it that you see here. So there's a little highlight that goes down here. Then they've blurred this part of the logo, and that along with this little shadow creates this kind of impression of a 3D lip, like it's got a lip to it. That's there. So I think that's a really pretty solution that I noticed there. And then also little things like this, like this text is, there's a little bit of a gradient there. So this is, all of these texts have a little bit of a drop off across the bottom. You'll notice that these all kind of fade, into a dark area. So this becomes heavily readable. Really nice color treatments on the way in. Nice use of their logo. Of course, this is telling us that we've got timeouts. And a lot of data. And if you actually look, it's kind of hard to see here, but if you look at this, if you take, go look at this at home in our stream, it may be too contrasty, but these letters have dimension to them. They're sitting over top of something that really has the feel of a slant because it's got a highlight up here and it gets darker going down, but that's cut out of the circle, which has its own highlights going across the top. And then of course this line is subtly telling you who's got the ball. And so there's a lot going on, in that little space. So yeah, go ahead, John.
Hey, I might have missed this because I had to go help my bird, but what are you using to capture all of this footage off the game?
Oh, YouTube TV.
Oh, you're using YouTube TV.
Screen. That's why. The only reason I'm subscribed to YouTube TV is that I can use. I just capture the web. I open it up in Chrome, and I just pull it down. So this is how the only reason I'm subscribed to YouTube TV is to do reference material. So this is how I grab it, and it's just QuickTime screen share with YouTube TV. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
You'll probably talk about it in a few minutes, but the little tabs in the corners are actually show as tabs, and as they have additional player graphics and so on, information that'll slide out, the tab will move to the left and expose more of a graphic. Also, if you look at the way the colors start on the team colors on the left and the right, and they fade to black. And I'm sure there was about a 4-hour meeting about the NBC logo that's in that middle circle that's in black and white, because what's the point of putting a peacock in if it's in gray? So
there's a lot of discussion
to alter that NBC logo to make it gray. for a Peacock was, I'm sure there were several meetings on that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, this is the one that drove me crazy as a walkthrough watching the game. It was a process of I'm seeing first, is it first quarter, first down? What the heck's going on? What is the nature of the game? This one doesn't give me that orientation as a casual user, and it drove me crazy because of that. I want to know, what down is it? I want to know more game central information so that I can orient myself coming in as a pass-through viewer. And this one just failed for me. There's too much that it doesn't tell me about the situation that I'm sitting down to watch to keep me up to date.
I don't know what NBC had decided related to that. I can tell you that in other graphics that I've created, we don't show you everything all at one time because there's a better chance that you'll watch for a little while longer and get hooked and then not go somewhere else. So part of the kind of, dropping out of information, like dripping it out, is to keep people on the show long enough to hopefully hook them or at least get our ratings. Go ahead, Roscoe.
I noticed that the timeouts, when they were used, didn't disappear completely. They left an indicator, and it made it difficult to look at and go, oh, do they have 3 or do they have 2? And that surprised me. They could have gone with a color, or they could have just had it completely go to the background.
Here's a little bit of a, kind of a nice little touch here when it goes here. You can see that that was kind of a cool, like if you look at how they did the score, let's see here, you can see it swings up like it's got like a little bit of a, and it's going to blink right before it, let's see here, hold on.
So Alex, is that lower
see
6,
that little blink?
The play timer? When you backed up to the first part of that roll, there was a little 6 that dropped down from the 7.
It was.
That
How many seconds before the?
We'll see that in a second. Yeah, and so, but you'll see this little flicker, and that is a subtle way to tell you that something's about to happen. So it's going to catch your eye. And then it's going to, swing up, and it's got a little bit of a bounce. It's going to pop up, and then it's going to come back down again.
It's the odometer plug-in, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it's, I thought that was a nice touch. And then you have, this is a pre-built graphic. So it's played out live, but it's not. And one of the things that would be hard to do, it's not impossible, but hard to generate in real time would be things like motion blur. So you'll notice that this is one of the things you look at here is that you'll see that those letters are being, they have motion blur added to them, which is a little harder to do in a live play out system. Not impossible, but difficult. You got little highlights there. I felt like after we saw something so complex before, I did feel like the letters here were a little boring, from that perspective. But otherwise it's cool. I mean, I think that a lot of things were kind of hot and cold as to whether people liked the very loud outline for that, but it's got a certain kind of energy to it. And I also thought it was interesting to choose to kind of frame it as what looks like a 1x1, like an Instagram look. So it's like we're in 16:9, but we're going to give you kind of that some kind of Instagram or look to it. It's what the kids are doing these days, I think. I also thought it was interesting that here we didn't have the same logo treatments that we saw otherwise. So the consistency felt a little odd, related to that. So anyway, so that's some of the stuff that noticed from that clip.
That one looks to me a little graphic equivalent of a ransom note. I just can't, it doesn't seem to have a style. It's got so many things going on. And the thing that bothered me the most when I saw that group come by is that the text in the third layer in the background, it was text, and I kept trying to think, does it say something to me? And I had no clue what it said after watching it, because they kept chopping up and adding other layers to things. And I'm sure that the kids love it, but it just drives me crazy.
Yeah, so here's another, here's some more of that lower third. So if we look at this here, you'll see it kind of nice little, like this is like I'm about to do something, so that we're going to tell you that we're doing something, and then we're going to pop this thing up over top. By the way, we're not going to show it here, but there was an incident where somebody got strapped with the wrong name. So if you're the one of the commentators near the beginning, I don't have it here because it was in the pre-show, but she got the wrong name strapped on her, and just in case you're wondering how big of a show you can have where you get the wrong lower third, the biggest show you can do it. So it just make you feel better when you do it, because we'll all do it someday. So anyway, so here you can see, there's a lot, now that was kind of interesting that, for the most part, we would see that get transitioned somehow to the next thing. And in here we didn't, that was a fade. So those logo treatments obviously didn't, get along. I will say that the readability, I felt like the readability is really high here. So if we go back to this, I mean, one of the things when you're looking at this is, number one is also, this is something that's just in everything that we do is always like your last name is going to be really, really bold. And that's kind of the common way to do this is last name is bold, first name is going to be smaller. But this I thought is really nice. And, there is still like, this isn't just gray. Like it may look that way in our stream, but there's a little bit of dimension to it. There's some dimension here. This is a really well-designed little, kind of pool here that's underneath him. Nice little lines. But again, there's a little bit of blue contamination that goes through here that gives it a little bit more dimension. I have to admit that one thing that's really important to me is lines. So like there's a subtle line that goes underneath his name, helps you package it. There's also a very subtle highlight that's down below here. And again, it just gives you a feel of dimension and a feel of structure, so I think that some of those things I think are more important than they seem. These are all the little elements that when you have a team really working through that, they're gonna make that work there. So they're wiped out. And then I thought that there's a lot going on there. If we look at this, and this is the kind of stuff you want to, pay attention to when you're doing this, is looking at, all the things that they're doing. So I do a lot when I'm examining. If I look at a graphic that I'm interested in, a lot of times I'm gonna look at in pretty deep detail, frame by frame, what's actually happening. So here you can see it. There it's spinning out with motion blur. Again, definitely doable in a render, but especially in a 2D display. But it's not trivial. It does require a little bit more comping. So here you can see the animation of those pieces there. There's this like I'm loading, and there's the little arrows that are going to announce, this is the direction they're going, or they're going forward. And but there's a lot of little pieces there, and all of those, and then there's the time clock for the amount of time left before the play needs to start.
I wish they'd been more consistent though, because that one helped me by saying it's 2nd and 5. The first one that you showed a minute ago.
Well, that was because it was fourth. That was a kick. It was the end. It was after.
Oh, I thought I saw a third down. Maybe
no, that was an extra. It was an extra point. So okay. there was no down. That's why I didn't have it. So but then in this one, I think that we'll see here in a second.
I never noticed those little arrows indicating the direction that they're traveling down the field.
Yeah, and then this isn't really the broadcast graphics, but I watched this stuff long enough to just be completely impressed by that. Like that, they're comping, like they're comping that graphic over top of the, they're comping the graphic, basically over top of the field, but underneath the players. And it's not a color key because you can see it going, there's a lot going on there that they're going, over or under. Somewhat color key, but there's a lot of complex keying that's going on to make that work. And so it's a really interesting puzzle that then tells you those bits and pieces there. And then I think we're gonna
something else, Alex, right there is how delicately they did the red, with about 5 seconds to go before delay of game. Sometimes they throw that red right on you. Here it's very delicate.
Let's see here. Oh yeah. Yeah, so it's turning. Yeah, you can see it getting, kind of red under. There it is, regular. And then it's like, okay, you're in trouble. Like it's just a really subtle red. You're right. It's great. And then you'll see the flag here. Nice little animation that tells us what's going on. I thought this was a nice touch. How many times do you get the a lower third for the for the actual
For the referee.
referee. I mean, you don't see lower thirds for referees very often. I was like, well, they didn't, no stone left unturned on that one there. And then here's the longer version of that. We were talking about that earlier. So this is that delay of game, and then it pops open. So we'll pop it.
Hey, Alex, as they move to higher and higher def, is that going to be a problem when his notes are on camera?
Yeah, I thought about that the other day. I was like, you could almost pull that information out when you're looking at all his notes there. But this is a really look at this, how it pulls. It goes, it's gonna pull out a little bit and then in. Like it's got, like, there's a lot. Again, it's worth when you look at this stuff. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button.
Bill, to your point, there are photographers in there with lenses that can read that.
Absolutely. And, they cover their mouth for the lip readers, but I think they're going to have to look at more and more aspects of revealing unrevealed or shouldn't be revealed information about the game. So
here's the thing this is why going frame by frame is important. So when they're going to kick it back in, watch this. They pull it out like you'd pull something to let it go. And then they're going to let it fly in. And then following it, it flies there. And then it's got like this little swirly. Look at that. There we go. It's a really nice touch, inside of that. And then now they're going to animate it too. And again, this is to the point that was made earlier. It's a lot of meetings, a lot of test renders. This is not something someone threw together overnight. Go ahead, Roscoe. Did you have something else?
No, that was from earlier.
Okay, let's go ahead and jump into some of the questions. We'll come back to them if we have time. I think we've been talking about this for a little while, and so let's get some of the comments or questions. Oops, sorry.
First one comes from Douglas Carmichael. He says, "How did they avoid the moire effect or scanning effect with the camera in front of the LED wall?" That is a complex thing to do. You're looking at distance, depth of field, sensor size, all those things, and getting it just in the right place. And you won't get those if the LED wall is got a tight enough pitch. It will work. And again, it's an interaction between where the depth of field is and also where they are. So they figured that out. Obviously, probably spent some time playing with it until it worked. Next question. Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is right back with, in the logo in the upper right corner, it was distracting to me. There was a tiny text above the Roman numerals that were close to spelling a word. What realistically would be the smallest text for broadcast TV?
It is small. I mean, I think if you're watching it on I think what he's referring to is the Super Bowl up here. So it says Super Bowl above the top there. I don't know what the tiniest text is. I think that this probably has a different set of rules than what we do. I usually say if you can't, for our graphics, if you can't see it at 640 by 360, if you can't read it at 640 by 360, I usually go, well, we can't use it because, that's the kind of the effective resolution of a phone, like what becomes readable on the phone. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and in print there's leading and font sizes, and everybody kind of knows how big they are. In anything dynamic like a television show, and particularly with multiple resolutions being fed, a 20-point type in one thing will be absolutely unreadable, and in a different circumstance with a different raster, that 20-point type will be perfectly readable. So I find that to be a very difficult thing in meetings when we're talking about the graphics that we do on our shows. You want your frame to make sure that the graphic is big enough, the text particularly is big enough to be read. And I keep hearing people talk about things like those old billboard rules to keep as little type as possible on screen. At one point, the billboard rules used to be 7 words is all you had for people at 60 miles an hour driving past, or 65 on a freeway. Past that, they're not going to turn, look at it, and remember what they're reading. So less is more always with text on a screen.
Let's go to the next question. Oh, Roscoe, sorry, I missed you there.
That's okay. It's just word shape plays a big role too, and contrast. So, those are big issues anytime something to be legible.
Yep. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana in the USA says, the wire cam work seemed excellent when doing those kinds of shots. The lower thirds always seemed a good contrast. Was that just a matter of coloration or just subtle borders?
There's a lot of subtle borders in there. So you can, there's definitely, I mean, it falls off to some degree if we cut to this right now. I mean, there's it's a good set of colors, and it is, but I think that those dark areas there's lots of little, if you really look closely, you're going to see a little light border that goes across the top there that helps separate this out from the background in an ever so subtle way that kind of keeps it from there. And so that's, a lot of those little edges definitely help define it from the background a little bit more effectively. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and one of the toughest things about this with a big sports thing with all sorts of different shots, because the camera is going to come up with crowd shots where you have no idea the colors, you have the field is going to be green, that, but that's not always what's going to be showing. So picking enough contrast elements, whether that's subtle borders, I just noticed on that little score thing, the central graphic, in order to maintain its circleness, has a tiny, tiny white border around it so that against those black jerseys, it didn't go away into just a muddy mess. So there's so many little design, small details that are trying to keep that one graphic to work in every shot they can point a camera at in a stadium, and it's no small task.
Before we go to the next question, we'll just play this out a little bit. We'll just look at one last little bit here in this clip. Here is let me move this over. Lots going on this little, it seems like a simple thing, little drone shot here. I'm assuming drone shot and probably not a helicopter shot, but it could be. And we won't go through it in as much detail as we have in the past, but you can see that there's, again, just a ton of little things happening all at one time here. So you see this, and the nice transition here. So this is going to close up, and then this is going to come back out again. Closing out, and then here it comes. You can see this nice little light swish that's going on there that's kind of giving you like a little bit of a little spice there. Nothing needed, but and there was a couple different designs in this area that were there. And then you'll see it kind of, there's that kind of squares that are kind of floating in behind it to give a little bit more bling. Random highlight in the center. It's not quite a lens flare, but it's close. They're using some. Someone's been watching a lot of J.J. Abrams.
I think the L gets kind of lost in the Lombardi Trophy in the background at the beginning as it's moving.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit there. It's pretty though. All right, let's go to the next question.
Next question, Super Bowl graphics. How would you add first down line and those graphics keyed over the field, but not as expensive as $25,000 per game? I've been thinking on Apple AR to try to do a less expensive solution.
I don't think I would try. like doing that. There's an old, something that's attributed mostly to Abraham Lincoln. But we don't know where the quote came from. It says it's better to keep one's mouth shut and look foolish than to open it and remove all doubt. And the reason I say that is that if you don't think you can do something well, then just don't try to add it to a show. And so a lot of times when in doubt, if you don't have the budget, if you don't have the right things, that putting those graphics on is really hard to do well. You're keying people that are moving with motion blur over top of a field that'll break up to a whole bunch of other things. And it's one of those things that I would highly recommend not trying to go too far down that path, because it's, and I've done it, I've gone too far where I can do this thing, I can make it really look cool. And usually I've learned to keep my elbows in. Go ahead, Courtney. I can't hear you, Courtney.
Also tracking it, because moving cameras, you have to have encoders on all the cameras to track it in real time. If you try and use optical tracking, it can't resolve for different camera angles quickly enough.
They're all calibrated. Yeah, they're all calibrated before the show.
Actually stuck on the field, and that takes really tight calibration so that you don't see any wiggle as the camera reframes or zooms out or zooms in.
Yeah, it's incredibly complicated to do what they're doing well. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I learned something in the post shows. One of the experts came in our after hours and explained that they actually put a sensor down on the sideline so that line actually has a sensor that it knows where to draw to. I didn't know there was something like that available.
Yeah. Well, but again, they're also, I believe that the cameras are still being calibrated to the field, from their position.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the fact that there was actually something physical on the sideline that they actually calibrate to.
Yeah, it's really cool. Let's go and look at a couple other things here. This is they got a touchdown here. You'll see this nice little graphic. And again, a lot of things going on here. So it's going to fold up, get out of the way. Here you can see and then it immediately jumps over to giving you the scoring drive data. So yet another build of that same look as they're grabbing onto that, and then that will most likely kind of fold back up into a show here. There we go. Oh, just fades out, and that's a different. This is yet a different. I do like something that NBC's been doing for a couple of their different shows is this kind of having the graphic draw itself, like edges draw itself on, and then come full frame is kind of a nice, like, here it comes, and then it jumps across. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Do you know what graphics is this ROS graphics package, or is it Chiron that's doing the compositing and the animation on this, and then that's doing the rendering? And
you're jumping ahead of our next question.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? I'm sorry.
Yeah. We'll go to the next question, but yeah, that's the question at hand. Go ahead. Let's go to the next question.
Yeah, Super Bowl graphics. Which apps would they be using to create these graphics? Asked Michael in Silverado, California.
I think that I can't remember what these are, but I think that they're either Chiron or Vizrt, I believe, for these. And I'm not 100% certain. Maybe we'll have some discussions in after hours with some folks about that. But I think that the only other graphics package we'll look at in a second is the ones that fall down, I believe, are ROS. So those are the only ones that are a little different. We'll take a look at that. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just interested that stripe that you just had up, the scoring stripe, was about the fourth form of that I've seen. So it's interesting to me that they're moving around, and I guess the tech director or the director are trying to figure out which form of that graphic is best for the scene they're showing. But it's interesting to me that they made so many different versions of here's where your information is.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure they're not figuring it out in real time. I mean, there's probably months and months and months of talking about.
Absolutely.
Like, we'll have this for this, and this for that, and this for this, and this for that. We did discuss this, and I think we're going to have to try to see if we can find someone that can tell us. But one of the questions that we had was, how do they quickly? At first we thought maybe these arrows were, only one direction or another, but they do feel like you can put this anywhere, and the arrow can be pointing any direction. And I think that I don't know how they do it. I don't know if they drop this and then pull an arrow out. I would probably have it be tap where I want the arrow to start and then tap again, and it would just appear. Like, that's how I probably build a system that would do that. But I find this to be not as well designed as everything else. It's nice and clear.
I'm sitting there looking at that going, which are they pointing to? Which player?
Well, that's not. I mean, I can see that. I mean, I guess I
because it goes over the shoulder of the player in the background, so I'm assuming it's not him. It's not the Bengal in front of us.
It is him. It's this guy here.
Okay. So yeah, that
and it's hard. It's hard. I think we're seeing it in a bad frame, but but I felt like this arrow just doesn't look as nice as the rest of the graphics. But maybe there was a limitation there. But these are all, of course, pre-built. You probably just type the name in. I don't know exactly how that works, but we'll find out. Anyway, it is amazing when you look at this, though, is that they have to, when they do these things, this is all happening, this graphic getting added and then them going ahead and playing it out, all happens in seconds. It's kind of an amazing, feat, related to that process. We did talk about this a little bit before we go to the next thing. I really felt like, this, you get into this, like, are you going to try to be, are you going to go for realism or not? I really, every time I saw this, I just felt like it was very painterly, like it didn't feel like it was, it felt like a kind of a Photoshop kind of thing. It is moving, so it's texture. It's like a texture map, something or other. But this just didn't feel like it was like as, I don't know, physical as some of the other ones that we, that we've looked at. So that was kind of. I do like the split screens. I just felt like this wanted to be. I don't know. I'm not the art director, but it just felt like very much like Photoshop, and rather than kind of the kind of geometry that we were seeing before that. This is a nice little transition there, and it's a different. So that's a transition to, kind of there's a lot going on here. I felt like this was just embossed across the bottom. Like, that also felt like a kind of a Photoshop emboss. underneath it. But it's funny how you're reproducing the limitations of the LED walls. But here's our LED, here's our pitch that's there, and we're actually attaching panels. So it gives it a little bit of geometry. Again, on some of these I felt like it was just a different team that built these. That weren't quite as. I felt like they weren't quite as designed as the rest of it. Next question.
That was the biggest turning players into heroes shot I saw. Every graphic piece of that is, these are our stars. Yeah. It's interesting. Eric Price in Kansas City has our next question. One issue with the game score graphic lower third was the degree to which the LA logo was cut off. Given how far out these graphics were developed, wouldn't they have considered or tested the dimensions of all the logos to make sure they all look good?
I think that there's a lot of, I felt like they really cut them off they cut off a lot of logos to try to create, I think it's really to try to create depth, in the feel, and here's another shot of some more logos here. Let's see here. So sometimes I think they're stacking things on top of each other. They're not necessarily cutting them off. Look at what I thought was really interesting is look at the reveal of the logo in the center and the little particle system that kind of precedes the build out is kind of cool. And then there's like a little bit of bounce, like they just keep moving. Like it just gives it doesn't really ever just stop, bump up and freeze. Yeah, go ahead, Dennis.
I did notice that where the logos were cut off in the lower third, they did actually appear when the graphic popped out from the side. So I think that was deliberate in order to continue the logo into the new bit that was added.
And I think some of the cutting off is that they keep the LA and less of the little swirl is kind of the, they feel like you still know what you're looking at. But let's go to the next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas says, how would you print graphics onto the field surface itself? Would it be a Zamboni-like vehicle?
I have no idea how those graphics get printed on. I don't know if anybody else does. I do not know how that happens. Here's another one of these big LED walls. Let's see here. Hold on.
We're not seeing a screen.
Here's that big reveal. It's kind of cool. Still feels like another piece of this that with this thing is this very much felt like when you take noise in Photoshop and then you give it a motion blur, a really high level, and then you use it as a texture map. Not that I've ever done that for metal, but that's when I saw that. It felt like that wasn't as now. I will admit that I have spent a lot of time doing Chrome, so when people do kind of scratched up Chrome, I'm just kind of like, oh, it's okay. But overall, I mean, it's a nice effect there for a sweep. But yeah, it was not 100% of that. Go ahead, Courtney.
I think for painting the field, they probably use some kind of rig like is used to paint large billboards, which is a large spray head hooked up to a computer that rolls. And so it has a kind of like a sprinkler that's spread out over, 30 or 40 feet, and they push it and it has color heads on it, that spray nozzles on it, and it prints it just like an inkjet, like a giant inkjet printer. And that is an artificial turf in that field. So I don't know what type of paint that they use to paint it with, but it must either be removable or they just discard that much turf, which would be quite expensive.
Yeah. And when you think about how much they think about the graphics here, when we get to here, you'll see that they designed their own set of graphics just for the stars. So I'm sure that there was a discussion before the show of where they all were and who they all were, and getting these graphics in to make sure that they were able to represent everyone. But that's a different graphic that was probably designed just for people that are going to be there that don't have a lot of other information. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so I watched something about a week ago that I found fascinating. There is a YouTube video on the weekend Super Bowl halftime show, and it's about an hour, maybe hour and 20 minutes long, and they talk a lot about how they had to do this because they're coming back. They knew that it wasn't going to be a regular halftime show, but this is a behind the scenes of the whole thing. You're watching dancer rehearsals, you're watching the cast come in. I was surprised to find that 90% of those people on the field are actually volunteers, and they come to dance rehearsals and do all sorts of stuff for weeks ahead of the actual game. And they followed some people through the process. But one of the most interesting things that I saw in that was how the grounds crew for the stadium controls a ton of their rehearsal time. They only get one rehearsal on the actual turf, and it comes like 5 days before the actual game, because once the ground crew takes over for doing those graphics on the field, the only people that can come on have to be on plastic. They literally roll out giant plastic protective sheets for the graphics, and only individuals can walk out if they have a purpose for that. Right. None of the rehearsal can happen after that point. So there's a very structured process for coming up to this huge event.
Yeah. Here's like this I thought was good. This is not part of the game, but really well done. I'm fairly certain this is a CG, CG neon, but really, really well done. And it's all the little details of, I've built some neon signs, and you really have to think to make it really feel like it's real. You really have to think about how is the neon being held. And I spent so much time researching neon signs when I built something like this, because they're really building that geometry. So if you look at, like, they're building in here, this is that kind of curve back, and then they've actually built the geometry and blacked it out, here, which is what you kind of paint that black area. You paint that because the neon has to be continuous, and so it'll come up and be black and then pop out. And so there's a lot of, someone really thought through that. That's all. That's all I'm going to say. It's the little things. And then there's a little bit of flicker. Kind of brings you back to the neon. This is the part that I believe was done in ROS, which I think looks really nice. You can see it kind of swinging in. The thing that's interesting here is that this has to integrate, with the ceiling piece. So this is actually, I believe that this is physical, right? So
yeah, yes, it is.
Level of registration is pretty high. That's that's coming out of the physical LED wall. That's popping out of it, which is, I thought, really a really cool effect. To make it feel like you're adding something to the physical.
And I love the little suspension cables that hold up the graphics.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because you got to, I just wondered what tensile strength those CG pieces have there. That's the real question there. Lots of geometry here. I think that this looks, in some ways better. I love the glow, that's on this render here. But a really, really, again, pretty design. It feels like there's a lot more. I will say that this feels a lot more worn and tattered, like it has a lot more history to it than the rest of the graphics on the show. Same here. So I think that's kind of a designer effect here. But really, really just very, like, all of this, popping up out of here, and the integration into here, I just thought looked really, really nice. Let's see, back up again. You see all the little light pieces, and whoa,
Alex, you may like this statistic. The actual sign that's holding up in the stadium, 80 million pixels.
That's a lot of pixels.
I think they may have actually this graphic is overlaying that sign, that the graphics there are actually overlaid over the physical sign, because otherwise they would have to coordinate with running the scoreboard graphics to put
which they could
precisely.
Ross was doing the scoreboard graphics. There's an article I posted.
Yeah, so I think that they were running the graphics, and I think they're running all of this down here too. So I think it's all integrated. I don't know if it's all integrated, but I think a lot of it is, which is even more impressive. But yeah, and I don't know whether if they overlaid this, it's even more impressive than if they just built out from it. But either way, it's a very tight integration between the graphic and the in the real world and the graphic itself. It's pretty impressive. Hold on, I just want to see one more thing here.
Oh, you can see the sky cam come into the shot at the very end of that too.
Yeah, there's a little bit as it flickers too. It's really interesting. Yeah, there's a sky cam going underneath it. Next question. Really
next
good.
one, Douglas Carmichael says, are the fonts used custom developed or stock?
I don't know for this one. I know that for a lot of them, we have most of our clients have moved to building their own fonts. So they start with some font. And the most typical one is they'll start with Helvetica, the ultimate, and then they hand it to a foundry and say, we want it to be a little bit more this or a little bit more that, and a font foundry will go through and adjust it from there. But it usually starts with some kind of major, a Myriad or a Futura or a Helvetica, kind of strong sans serif fonts. They don't have little serifs on the bottom and the top. So a strong sans serif font, and then they hand it to a foundry, and then the foundry does something else to it, and they don't have to change it very much, and then it becomes something different. And partially so that it has a look to it that is their look, but it is they want it to have their look, and also it's cheaper to pay the foundry to make adjustments to the font than it is to pay for the licensing. once you and so a lot of large corporations have kind of moved towards that I've worked with have moved towards building their own fonts, and then they hang on to them pretty tightly. Like they don't want you using them somewhere else. So yeah, Bill.
Well, there's also a couple other things in that last frame you had up. It was interesting to me that the billboard there, the display in the stadium had two different fonts because they were using the team approved fonts for each one. So you had two big slabs, not sans serif fonts. The Bengals font was totally different than the Rams font. So you had two text styles going on there. And then in the center, you had all the clean fonts that the graphics generators typically used to come with. I mean, when you license something from a font generator, they would usually have a set of fonts that were particularly tuned to work in the resolutions of that thing. It's only been pretty modern that you can take any font and throw it onto TV. And that's the problem, I think, with people who are not used to doing these kind of display fonts on a television raster. It's really easy these days to pick a font on your Macintosh and throw it up on a TV screen and have it fall apart completely because the serifs are too fine or something is off about its mapping to the raster. So the CG companies used to take care of that. They don't as much anymore. So I think Alex's point of lots of meetings and lots of how are we going to do this, and is it okay with your team design, graphic designers standards, and where can we diverge and where can we not diverge? Because typography, particularly in logos, is a big deal. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten calls going, did you compress our type? Yeah, you can't do that. It's our logo.
Yeah.
Put it back.
Yeah. We do everything we can not to change the type. That's one of my pet peeves about CNN is they don't have that problem. Let's look at one more graphic here, and then I think we're going to be pretty close. But if you have more questions, go ahead and throw them in there. Here's one we can see here. Oops. You can see me, right? This is kind of a nice transition again. You can always imagine that someone, when they shot the video, they don't look down, look up, and look serious like that. That's not by accident. They probably directed a whole bunch of different things. Look over this way. Be happy. Be sad. Be upset. Whatever that is.
And you're checking your email and you're looking at the camera.
Yeah. Check your email. Now check the camera. Now check the email. Now check the camera. A lot of stuff going on here. I mean, there's, they have this it took me a little while to realize what they were doing here, but these are like the X's and O's on a play is kind of the, what they're showing there. And it's, again, it's lots of, this is almost like visual, what we would call, greeblies in visual effects, where there's just lots of little detail that adds a sense of depth, to the thing. But you have, it's really, but it's nice, it's nice kind of feeling of that this is being projected on some kind of curved glass is a pretty cool effect as far as how that goes. And again, this is, when we look at it, we also want to remember that this is a lot of work, so you also don't want to try to hold yourself to the, to the standards that are here. Go ahead, Courtney. Were you going to ask?
You'll notice that there's everything's anti-aliased on all the fonts, even though they're coming out of a font generator or something. Everything is very carefully anti-aliased, especially since they're moving through all kinds of different angles. You don't see any crawl around the edges or anything.
Yeah,
as it's rendered out.
Yeah, absolutely. And then last question.
Last one comes to us from Roscoe Jones in Brea, California, here on the panel. And Roscoe asks, why do you think NBC chose not to stream in 4K as CBS has done in the past?
I don't know.
And I have a slight correction. It's actually not the Super Bowl. It's Thursday Night Football that gets streamed in 4K.
Yeah, it gets streamed in 4K because Amazon's doing it, and Amazon wants to show off that they can stream in 4K. So I think that's the I think that most of the stuff is generated at this point in 4K. I think it's just a matter of, what's being delivered here. Here's another one of the ROS graphics here. I'll show this real quick. This is another version of that isn't like there's just another. There's the lines that we were talking about earlier. That I don't know what the tensile strength is of those cables there.
How many helicopters does it take to hold that up?
I know, and so steady. I mean,
you can see the drone. Look at the drone down in the water, though. There's a little robot drone they were using.
Look at that. They got little reflections in the water.
Yeah, there are reflections in the water.
Look
and
at
perturbances that match the graphics.
Oh my gosh, that is so great. I didn't see that before.
Yeah, this one looks to me
Really
substantially more sophisticated than most of the others through the whole show. So I think that they went to a top line graphics house who has all the skills and all the tools and made everything as perfect as they could, as opposed to that variety of different approaches during the show.
Well, I think it's probably top line all the way through. I mean, I think they just made decisions about what the look and feel is going to be there.
And the live shot may be canned. The background shot that may have been shot on another day.
I don't know if it is. I think that system is actually pretty capable. So I think that they could shoot it live. A lot of times they don't. What you don't want to do is shoot it a couple days earlier and then have it be cloudy instead of, that kind of loses the happiness.
I'm going to say it was live because that little boat drone that they had they used during the pregame festivities. And so it was there. So I don't think it would have been there on another day.
Yeah. One more, another question.
Yeah, we did get another one in from Douglas Carmichael. How would you create the neon effect on text? Would that involve modeling each letter?
Yep. Every little line is 3D geometry. Next question.
Douglas is right back with, are the neon sparks manually created or automatically created?
They're manually created, but they're probably a particle system. So there's a little emitter that will emit those sparks either off of a surface or off of a point or off of an area. Next question.
Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, BC says, it's cool to see real-time anti-aliasing of moving graphics over live video. What level switcher is needed to get that?
It's not the switcher, it's the renderer. The renderer has to be able to do that. And you can do it in a couple different ways. One way you can do is render it at much higher resolution, like a 4K render. And then you basically just squeeze it down before you send it out. And that creates the anti-aliasing. So sometimes you don't do it in that area, but it's the renderer itself. The switcher just passes the video through and does the comping. All right. That was a fun little hour to cover some great graphics. Again, whether you're into football or not, we watched the whole game and didn't have any audio on. All we were talking about is the production. And so I think it's again, probably the best graphics, live graphics that we see each year. Because there's just so much money applied to it. And so it's really fun to kind of break it down and learn from it. We'll talk next week about the Olympic graphics and see if there's anything else we want to add to our discussion. So in a week, we'll do that. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Hey, wasn't Bo part of the Super Bowl graphic stuff?
I can neither confirm nor deny it.
He was here earlier and he's grayed out now.
Yeah. So but what I will say is that we'll probably keep on discussing this a little bit in after hours. So I would highly recommend that. So anyway, yeah. So I will now thank our producers. Thank you for all the great questions, keeping it all alive. We had plenty of questions. I realized we just cut through them really fast. The first hour, there was a lot. We're getting better. So now the producers need to produce more questions. It's a back and forth all the time. So thanks to the producers for that, and then also thank to our panelists. We can't do this without you. And a lot of great questions, great conversation. And stay tuned. Again, we have Blair coming on tomorrow, our metalsmith, Blair Anderson. I'm pretty excited about that. So come and check that out. It's going to be a little bit of a different turn, but I have to admit I'm mesmerized by metalsmithing, so it should be a lot of fun. All right, let's go ahead and we are going to now jump, but I've not been given my host back. So whoever's hosting, usually I get that they're holding me hostage here because I don't have that. Oh no, I don't. Hold on a second here. I'm just in the wrong place. I got a little thrown off here. So this is kind of a slow ending. This is when I just talk and I kind of fill in. I realized that I didn't open the button that I was supposed to open before I started talking about leaving. And so we're all just kind of waving and